A one-time mayoral candidate vanishes without a trace. 8 months later, he surfaces as the suspect in a murder case involving a notorious cult. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. There's an interesting timeline in this case that spans multiple months and states. But let's begin back in April, when 39-year-old Adam Arthur Rosenthal went missing. Rosenthal had previously made a name for himself, running for mayor of Gainesville, Florida back in 2022, but out of nowhere, he vanished. He was reported missing months later on June 18th. Investigators didn't have any luck finding him though, so Rosenthal's friends took to the internet, making posts like this one asking for help. For months, there were no leads in the search for Rosenthal. Jump to November 26th, when the body of Darren Gambrel, whose friends called him Cody, was found in Pulaski, Tennessee. It's a small town about 75 miles south of Nashville, close to the Alabama border. Authorities haven't released an official cause of death for Gambrel, but some unverified reports say he was stabbed to death. Gambrel was in Pulaski, Tennessee, as part of the 12 Tribes religious group. The organization actually dates back to 1972, when it was founded in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Its members hold a lot of beliefs, a combination of things like Christian fundamentalism, the Hebrew roots movement, Messianic Judaism, or even the sacred name movement. The group refuses to align beliefs with just one movement though, and thus they claim to be an emerging spiritual nation that's made up of 12 self-governing tribes. Ex-members though claim it's actually a cult with a sordid past. Reports have come out over the years of corporal punishment, child sex abuse, and exploitation of child labor laws, all at the hands of the 12 Tribes movement. There are sects of the group all across the country that have a history with raids. In 1984, a Vermont chapter was raided by the Vermont State Police, who took custody of hundreds of kids on allegations of child abuse. In 2001, they were in the headlines once again, this time in a New York Post article alleging child labor violations. All that brings us to today's case, the murder of Darren or Cody Gambrel. Investigators say Gambrel had been a member of the 12 Tribes group for multiple years. Adam Rosenthal, however, had joined less than a year ago. Investigators say he'd been part of the group for 6 to 9 months. We're still unclear what led up to Gambrel's death, but somehow the investigation quickly pointed in Rosenthal's direction. With the help of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, he was taken into custody the same evening Gambrel's body was found. After that, 2 search warrants were executed at multiple properties belonging to the 12 Tribes. Rosenthal has since been charged with criminal homicide, aggravated assault, and tampering with evidence. Let's be real. I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos. And if you're out and about running errands, listen up, I have to tell you about this new app, Upside, that gets you free cash back on daily essentials. I now use Upside every time I pump my gas because it's so easy and it's free, so why not? All you have to do is download the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. You pay as usual and then just follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Now, there are a lot of layers in this case and still a lot of questions. That's why we're turning to retired police commander and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. Mike, as always, it's great to talk to you.
Well, so nice to be with you, Sierra. Thanks for the invitation.
You know, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you specifically is that this case involves cult activity, and I know you have a bit of a background in that. So now we have a murder accusation here and a cult kind of involved. How does that factor into the investigation?
You know, this one is really into me because, again, you have the victim in the case is reported a longtime member of the 12 Tribe cult, and because of that, he's going to be much more entrenched in the ideology, the belief system, the methodology of how control is maintained within the cult. And we really don't know if he has a leadership role or if he is just an equal to the now accused killer in this case. But that's the key, is the killer comes into this thing as a convert to the belief system and the ideology. And as he comes in, we know that he ran for mayor, so he has this ideal that he is somehow a leader. And does that play into this whole thing? And was there conflict as he tried to assert more power and control within the cult, and people push back on him. So as we learn more about the dynamics, I think we'll really understand what the motivation was for this crime. And that's why it's so important that we think about things like the victimology, the study of who the victim is, and the suspectology, the study of who the suspect is. Because as we look at their personality types, we're going to start to understand why this conflict happened.
You brought up so many different things because there's so much to unpack with this case. Let's start with the suspect, though. As you mentioned, he ran for mayor down in Gainesville, Florida, and then was reported missing back in April. So this guy has been MIA for a while. He only turns up when he's the suspect in a murder. I mean, that to me kind of stood out a bit. What do you make of that part?
Yeah, so the question again is going to be, and it's again so important that we understand the suspectology, or the study of the suspect in the case, because we're going to try to understand and then figure out as time unfolds or as information becomes more available, why on earth he disappeared. What would motivate a person to just disappear off the map? Are they like a Hannah Kobayashi? And that probably isn't going to help because you're trying not to tie these things together, but who decides, hey, I've been enlightened and I want to go start a new life? Or are they fleeing from something, maybe a criminal issue that they've got going on, or financial issues, or other kinds of things? So again, it is going to be imperative that we study the suspectology.
If we're taking a look at the victimology too, because obviously you mentioned that's really important. They knew each other because of their involvement in this cult. We don't know that much about the victim as of right now. We don't even know how he died exactly. Why do you think that may be that police haven't released that information?
Well, it's interesting, and I've actually seen some reports that are suggesting, and most of this is coming across X and other places where people sometimes share a little bit that hasn't been publicly announced, but we're hearing that possibly the weapon used was a knife in this particular homicide. And the thing that I find so interesting about the suspectology that we're going to want to really focus in on is, what was his role in the organization? Was he a leader in the organization who may have been applying rules and responsibilities to the predator in this particular case? Or was he an equal in the organization? And those are going to give us some indications of what's going on. What was his background from a professional standpoint before he joined the group? What's his personality like? Is he a person who's submissive, meek, able to get along with everybody? Or is he somebody who's a little bit overpowering and maybe controlling?
After this murder, a couple of search warrants were executed on two properties belonging to this religious organization, this cult. It kind of gets me thinking about police interviewing some of the people who live with them or work alongside them in this religious group. But does that make things even more tricky, having to interview people who are part of this cult because it's so insular?
So God bless the investigators who have to try to get cult members to share information about what the inner workings are of something that they hold sacred and dear. In fact, if you think about most cults and some of the ideology of this cult, as you look at it internationally and the way it's been portrayed in the media, and people who have left the cult have talked about it, it's a very exclusive kind of a feeling. We have more light and knowledge as members of 12 Tribe than anybody else. We see this separation from other faith traditions, that no, we're a little bit more special, we're a little closer to God. And so when you get people who believe that they truly have this special dispensation from God, sharing something with an investigator, a carnal person of the world, is like the last thing that they want to do. And so those investigators have a challenge ahead of them, trying to get information out of the group and out of the members of the group. They're going to probably be better off with people who have left the group and will share information more openly. And again, that's where we see this difference between a convert, someone like the predator in this case, who comes in, maybe has a flash of insight and says, "What am I thinking?" and someone who is long-term and really into the systemic belief system, or someone who's raised in it, generational cult members who just have no other idea of anything going on out in the outside world. And we know that they're prevented from talking or hearing and being a part of the outside world, other than through businesses where they control their employees and the employee interaction with people from the outside.
I do have to wonder about 12 tribes in general because they have kind of a long history and they also have a history of allegations of illegal activity, whether it's violations of child labor laws or even child sexual assault. They have some pretty severe things that have been wagered against them. Do you think that this investigation could open up things that are related to the cult? Okay, now that they executed these search warrants, they're on the grounds, they find something that they weren't looking for, but it could be illegal.
Undoubtedly, there will be additional kinds of investigations that spring up out of this. We saw it with the child labor issues. We see it when there's questions about whether there is abuse of the children because of the hardline rule that they have of it's okay to use a rod on a child because the Bible says you do that. So as we see these kinds of things, we'll see things that come into conflict with the laws of the land. And those things will be investigated. But again, getting information from people within those organizations is so difficult that law enforcement really has a challenge ahead of them. And we get frustrated in the public because we just got this emotional feeling that says something's wrong here and something needs to be done. But we have to keep in mind that law enforcement has to follow the rule of law and understand a case that's built on elements of crime. Being a member of a deviant kind of a thought process is not criminal. It's criminal when it breaks or violates law.
We've talked about interviewing all of the people who were in this cult or may have known the victim and the suspect. But what about speaking to the suspect directly? I know that he was a convert. He had only been in this religious organization for 6 to 9 months, I believe. So he may have held some of their ideology, but may not be as immersed as some of these other life cult members, as you mentioned. Do you think that investigation or that interview is going to be a bit more difficult or easier?
Well, it depends on the investigator and what the investigator's experience level is in dealing with cult behaviors and cult mentality, because you do have to approach them a little differently. It's almost like you're better off sitting back and saying, you're the expert, you're the pro in this cult, and I'm just the student. So teach me about the cult, and then see if there are admissions that come out, not necessarily confessions, but admissions of behavior and problems and issues, and lead them into that. But again, if the investigator goes into this looking at it as a cult crime rather than a homicide, they're going to be facing a little bit of an uphill battle. If the investigator goes in and says, what are the elements of homicide and what do I need to prove? They're going to solve that problem more easily because it's familiar to them in their normal day and course of investigations. And then bring in the wackiness of the behavior and the ideology and the belief systems behind the ideology and the way in which they operate, and use all of that as kind of aggravating factors to support your element crime that you built.
We're still kind of in the early stages of this investigation, but I'm wondering, what do you think is next for the people who are involved in this case?
Well, they've got to do an incredible amount of forensic examination, mobile phones, locations off of vehicles, whatever they're able to get from computers and other kinds of pieces of forensic data. They're going to have the actual autopsy completed and the forensics in the autopsy to try to really understand what caused the death. They're going to have to be able to examine the crime scene closely and look at the evidence that they've collected. And then, if you think about criminal cases, the best criminal cases are cases that are built on multiple forms of evidence. So we're not relying on somebody's eyewitness that I saw him do this, or a confession, because we know that eyewitnesses can be challenged. We know that confessions are sometimes given because people want to seem like they're more crazy or more evil or more involved. And other times they're trying to minimize anything that they have to do with it. Really good criminal case is really a case that's circumstantial, that's built on all of these different things: physical evidence, forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, behavioral evidence. And then as you bring it all together, it paints a picture that a judge or a jury could understand and hopefully lead to a conviction if, in fact, this guy's guilty of murder.
It's a big undertaking. We've got a lot ahead for the investigators in the case, so definitely one we'll keep tabs on. Mike, thank you for coming on with us today and talking to us about the case.
Thanks, Sierra. It's great to be with you.
Adam Rosenthal is being held in the Giles County Jail. He's due back in court on December 10th for his preliminary hearing. For Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.